Thank you for the opportunity for talking about the Irish funded university situation post-COVID. I think for us to fully understand the potential impact and the known impact of COVID-19 and the other perfect storms that have happened in higher education, we probably should take a pause back for the moment and just remind ourselves as to how the system is funded, what the crash did to this funding model, how it changed behaviour, and then move into the response during the COVID period, some of which is positive, but some of which will probably have long-term impacts on the financial sustainability of a university sector. So let's first review the income sources. I think if you go back 30, 40 years ago, most of the Irish universities, including University College Cork, were predominantly teaching institutions. That has significantly changed when we had what's called PRTLI-5, a programme for third level institutions in relation to research funding, which occurred probably somewhere around 25, 30 years ago. And that changed the investment, first of all, in terms of research, but also the public sector investment together with philanthropic investment enabled a significant change in the funding models. But put that aside for a moment. What are the main income streams at Irish universities? First of all, tuition fees. Tuition fees predominantly coming from students who are paying directly, predominantly undergraduates, and then more increasingly postgraduates. So University College Cork has about 70% undergraduate, 30% postgraduate students. So if you look at the financial model in those, each student paying about €3,000 in today's money does not cover the full economic cost of the actual delivery of those programs. So in terms of income, that's the first element that comes in. The second income is the core state grant, and that core grant has been fixed on the national level. So as the student body grows, each slice that's taken out by each institution declines. So if you could imagine it being a pizza, the more slices you take and the bigger those slices, and the pizza doesn't get any bigger, then the amount of money coming for the increase in student body is really declining as we go by, and that has declined very, very, very significantly. Research income has grown, and that has both changed the models of resource allocation, but also has increased a new cost. And there is a view that there's been a cross-subsidy of research from teaching and learning, because we know that the full economic cost of research is not covered by the research grants. The extent of overhead which is delivered by most projects actually falls far short of what the full economic cost is. So therefore, for a successful university like UCC, where about 1/4 of our income relates to research income. So the total income approximately of University College Cork in 2020 is about 430 million, of which about 1/4, over 100 million, comes from research. Now, if that was full economic costing, then that would work pretty good, actually. But the fact that the overheads are low, and in some cases not at all, that means we are cross-subsidizing. So there's a significant impact on research income. Other activities in universities, and this has probably been a problem, and we'll come back to this in a moment, but other activities in universities have supported income through what we refer to as probably as ancillary activities. These include things like accommodation, catering, spin-outs, other types of events, and the Irish public sector universities, particularly the Dublin universities, have been probably better at that. If we look at Trinity College, I know that they have trumped the importance of raising income from the Book of Kells and other tourist activity on the campus to somewhere of the order between 20-25 million a year, and that's supporting a significant amount of enterprise in the university, and it's fantastic. But I mean, setting up that enterprise is not really a core mission of an institution. So, but the universities have had to find the income to enable that kind of sustainability of the funding models in the past. So that's the kind of major income streams that happen. So technology transfer, for the most part in Irish institutions, is pretty low. The amount of equity that the university takes is generally pretty low. And I think we're at an early level of maturity curve, both in the number and in the amount of equity that's been taken from these. So in terms of the income, for the most part, the income comes from tuition, and some ancillary activities, and some coming from research. So everything as we start, so I'm just trying to paint a picture of the university sector having started from a teaching model right through to start changing the dial to research, then the research model being very good insofar as they were all very hungry to do research, but if you don't fund it fully and full economic costing, then you immediately are starting to get that cross-subsidy from the teaching and learning, which is already poorly funded. In the past also, the university would have received funding from the state for capital projects, for refurbishment and maintenance on an ongoing basis, and the assets values, if they're not maintained, of course, declined. Then, of course, we had the perfect storm of the economic crash. And during that period then, the amount of public funding declined significantly. The amount of public money coming from the state per student declined. Participation rates increased because the demographics, so the amount of money coming in was less, but the number of students going in increased. So the increased cost of supporting those students, which is really, really important. So what did the universities do? Well, the university said, okay, we're ambitious. We want to be performing well in the rankings. We want to conduct research. So how do we now look at new opportunities? So we saw a further diversification of income streams, particularly on international students. And that meant universities like UCC going to faraway markets in Asia, United States, India, and other markets for non-economic or non-EU paying students. So students are paying full economic fee for their education. And of course, that brings with it a whole range of fantastic opportunities for diversification of our community, internationalization of the curriculum, new experience for our faculty, new experience for Irish students. So a lot of really, really good, rich things come from that. But then, of course, we are then perhaps over relying on that. And in UCC, for example, 17% of our students are international students. And that was an attempt to try and offset some of the economic costs that were a reduction of the economic incomes from the state. In the same time, we started to increase then accommodation became scarce during the crisis. So the universities then started to build accommodation opportunities or take accommodation opportunities. And at that point, we started to get loans from the European Investment Bank. So these loans have propped up a lot of what's happened in the Irish sector, but also including UCC. And during that period then, models were designed to look at investment in accommodation and in other infrastructure, which was predicated on a certain growth of student numbers, both nationally and internationally. And that is to finance this kind of activity. During this period also, this was during the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and 2010, and post that period then, we also got a significant decline in the maintenance grants for the campus activities. So that has resulted in a sweating of the assets to the extent that the assets were really not being replaced. I'm talking about IT infrastructure, I'm talking about basic buildings and laboratory infrastructure, and to my embarrassment, sometimes the quality of the infrastructure in second level schools for science students in particular was somewhat better than what it was in the university. So we've gone through this is before COVID, we went through a really challenging time. And then of course we started to climb out of that economic crisis. And during that economic crisis then, we learned to do things differently. We tried new things, and some of that was good. It's not all bad, actually. Some of this was about how we reimagined our curriculum, how we aligned it perhaps more with the demands of society, how we didn't give up our values in terms of the role of the university, but at the same time, we probably tailored it a bit more to the economic side in terms of research and in terms of skills demands. So that was going fine, and the universities were climbing back out of this. UCC had a very strong portfolio of international students relying on this. Now to offset to the extent that now our income, less than 50% of our income comes from the state. So the rest coming from the income sources that I mentioned, ancillary, research and international students. And then of course COVID comes. And then what did COVID do? Well, COVID did a whole range of things actually, of course. The first thing it did is it stopped the movement of international students, or at least threatened the international student cohort. It meant that we couldn't visit some wonderful places and meet wonderful colleagues to recruit students. So that immediately began to slow the recruitment cycle. We also had to move online very quickly, so that the investment that if we hadn't made it, we had to continue to invest in IT infrastructure, but also in our people and skills and upskilling colleagues to enable us to deliver online. And also those other ancillary activities like accommodation, like tourism, like other economic impact were immediately impacted. The provision of restaurants, gyms, all of this, suddenly the income streams or the cash that was coming from those was immediately stopped. And of course the costs remained. So we were caught in the perfect storm of having just climbed out of an economic crisis with very little investment in the infrastructure, except that which was being supported by loans, followed on by the COVID crisis then, which there was a particular demand on new kinds of investment. And I guess the question that we're struggling with a little bit is, what does this mean actually for the sector into the future? So while there's been a lot of adaptation, there's been a lot of responsiveness by the faculty. And I should mention, of course, amidst all of the post-crisis then was this idea of an employment control framework, where the universities were controlled by in the number of posts that could be funded by the state. So while the total number of staff was a matter for the university, the government was only prepared to pay up to a certain number of staff for the core teaching staff. And the main liability there, I guess, is pension costs out on beyond the cycle of the actual direct costs. So University College Cork, like every other higher institution in the state, was given what's a fixed number under which it had to keep its staff. If it wanted to grow that staff, those staff had to be supported by non-exchequer income streams. So now you're beginning to get a diversity of income streams. You're getting a mix on who those streams are supporting. You're getting perhaps different contractual arrangements. So you're beginning to shift the model. And I'm not saying it's all bad. Of course it's not. There were good elements in that. But of course it makes the system very unstable. And then of course when COVID came, then it pushed us a bit further into the system. So the inflow of resources has changed. So our fee structure, the fees has changed to some extent. The impact in UCC, particularly for undergraduate international students, hasn't been as big as we might have had expected at the earlier part of the cycle. We certainly have had a decline in postgraduate international students, but not postgraduate EU students. So we had been planning a particular size and shape of our university based on enrollment planning, based on our curriculum offerings, and I think we've met most of those objectives. And I think we're really pleased on the manner in which our students' recruitment has worked, largely down to very strong leadership by our recruitment team and by the faculty and the colleges and by our staff to enable the students to be recruited and brought onto the programs. So I guess as we look to the future, what might the impact be on teaching, what might be impact on research, and what might be the impact of the role of the university more generally. So let's take the teaching first. I think as we move towards more alignment, if I could use that phrase, between industry perhaps and what we might ideally like a university to have. So this UCC is a comprehensive university ranging from humanities right through to science, engineering, right through to law, right through to medicine. So the question is, can a comprehensive university exist in that kind of scenario? And that's one of the areas we're grappling with at the moment. Do we have the capacity, financial capacity, and the demand to support disciplines that ordinarily we would hope and want in a comprehensive university? And that brings real challenges in terms of staff-student ratios to make sure that we respond, I suppose, in some ways to good education, to make sure that the class-student ratios are sufficient for good quality teaching. And of course, that indirectly would impact on rankings and everything else. So impact on the quality of staff experience and student experience and so forth. Also, because of the increased complexity of the student body, the impact on resources has been very considerable. So the more you diversify your student body, and I hugely welcome that as an ecologist, as a simple axiom that diversity begets stability. So I'm really committed to diversity in every form and shape as an ecologist, but it does come with it increasing costs in terms of student support. We also, mental health and well-being is becoming increasingly important in our student body. So all of these have come to impact on the demand on the resources of the institution at a time when income is under huge pressure, income from fees, income from the ancillary areas, and so forth. So that's the future post-COVID. We're going to have to work our way through that, and at UCC we're going through what's called well, everybody's talking about pivots now, but a strategic pivot where we're beginning to reimagine what the university might look like. Its curriculum, its number of programs, but also the schoolification, and all of that process. And we've enjoyed a review of the university by the University Association IEP, that's Institutional Evaluation Programme, to assess us and put a lens on us as to how our university is functioning both on teaching, research and administration. So I'll move to research now. Obviously, research is critical to UCC. It's critically important to any modern university, and without research you don't have a university actually. So UCC is absolutely committed to making sure we have a high quality, high performing research system. And in the last decade, actually, we've had a research RQR is what will be known in the UK, a research assessment exercise to help us to identify those areas that we're strong in and to start to turn the dial in terms of improving the quality of research in the university. And that requires resources, and we've put resources into that to undertake the review across every single school, and then bring in panels to assess the quality to make sure that it's been nudged on to a higher quality in terms of publications, in terms of PhD experience, and also in terms of other impact and society impact of the research. But of course, the challenge remains that the quotient of overhead that comes from research has not grown. So the full economic cost has still not been delivered. It's becoming hugely challenging for our research community, despite we want to do it, we want to be successful, and we will continue to do it. But it does bring big challenges in terms of where the money might come to support that. So we're continuing to grapple with that agenda, and we will continue to do so. I think we will continue to seek. And I suppose what I'm really struck by is if you look at the European programs of which we are moving quite rightly significantly towards securing funding there. So our portfolio funding will be from the state-funded ones through the HGA, which we get a certain amount of money. That's a higher education authority for PhDs. We will compete for international grants, our national grants, international grants, and European grants, in particular Horizon 2020 grants. And I suppose one of the areas that I'm really enthusiastic about is the ERCs, the European Research Council grants. And we have a small number of them in UCC. I've had the privilege of recruiting 3 of them to my own former school, the Biological, Earth and Environmental Sciences. And these are blue sky research, because one of the consequences of the applied research is twofold. One is that it's, and these are my words, maybe a little bit more slavish to particular types of research, and very little opportunity for blue sky research. And at the same time, you're not covering off all the costs. So there's a kind of a double effect. And the third effect, actually, sometimes it's very difficult to, not difficult, it's probably more challenging to get research published in high impact journals when it's coming from industry sources. Not always, but sometimes. So the whole ecosystem of research, translation, impact needs reimagining. And I'm encouraged that I think it was about 2 years ago, I was at a European Universities Association conference in Sorbonne in France. And for the first time ever, I heard the European Commission colleagues speak about how we might measure the impact of research on the curriculum. Because if we can have a research-based curriculum like what we're doing at University College Cork, based on our connected curriculum, where we're connecting with research, employability, sustainability, interdisciplinarity, community engagement, and global reach, that if we can weave those together, that cross-subsidy then becomes incredibly valuable. So a very simple example, University College Cork is world-renowned for for APC, the Microbiome Institute. And yet we don't have a module in the microbiome. So there's a kind of a disconnect there that's happened. So I'm hoping post-COVID that we can change the dial in terms of how we connect teaching and research in a really important way. That's not to say, of course, that our students are not engaged in research at all levels in the institution, that we're not translating in. But I'm just giving a polarized example, perhaps, of that kind of situation. And finally, then, the administration of the university. Things are getting more complicated. There's more demands on the universities in terms of its social responsibility, its health and safety responsibilities, its compliance responsibilities, the ethical responsibilities, which is right and proper. But all of these come with an overhead. They all come with increased costs. So if you can imagine increased cost of research administration, increased cost and diversity of student support, then that increased the administrative load. And if at the same time we haven't changed and leaned down the system to make sure we're becoming more effective in what we do, then the overhead cost becomes extremely high. So I'm just currently leading a program of transformation through collaboration at UCC, based around a connected university, where we're transforming a whole range of programs, and in particular in the IT infrastructure, where we're starting to reimagine all of the steps we've taken in program approval, student application fees, and leaning them down. So we're getting rid of as much paper as possible. So we are really working on the administrative side. So I think I can say that the finances of the sustainability of the university will continue. There's no question. This university will celebrate in November of 2020 175 years of students enrolling at University College Cork. I have no doubt in 175 years' time we will still have students at UCC. The quality of that education will change. We need to future-proof our graduates. We need to make sure that they are critical, independent thinkers that are going to change the world. And the values that we articulate in our academic strategy will be called out about social responsibility, digital fluency, and global citizenship. These are the real important matters to the future. And we can only do this in a truly sustainable way. And University College Cork being the first green flag campus in the world, the only university outside of, or the first university outside of North America to get a Gold Star Award for sustainability. And indeed, our rankings in this area are really important to me. So when you weave together the ambitions of the next generation of young people, the responsiveness of the university community in UCC, where we have a simple mission that says student-led, research-informed and practice-focused, we are going to change the world. I'm very optimistic about the future, and I think money is important, but actually people are more important. And if we can invest in good people, even with limited resources, we can do something really special to make sure that this world and the place in which we live in today becomes better, and actually becomes better for the people that live in it. Thank you for your time.